Greetings. Okay, Beautiful Soul Part 4. Last time we spoke about the pietist roots of the beautiful soul and its transformation into German Romanticism and a sinister afterlife it had in Nazi race ideology. So, the beautiful soul, it was in part a religious phenomenon, and this video and the next I want to propose that one of its manifestations was a yearning for the unreachable divine, which masquerades in the form of romantic love. Okay, so what does that mean? Second, fix this. So, what does that mean, it's masquerading as romantic love? So, and I'm sorry to break this to all you young lovers out there, but you're really a beautiful soul. You thought you were in love, but in fact, you're really a beautiful soul, sublimating your love or mistaking your love for the divine beyond or for the perfect world. Okay. So a book came out this year called The Story of Original Loss by Malcolm Slavin. So he describes a human existential trauma of original loss, which arises from the loss of experiencing ourselves as innately belonging to the larger natural world in our prehistory. Okay. So, before we knew we were going to die. So, it's got a Rousseauian theme. So, we become aware of our mortality and the need to understand that loss, and we need to create a sense of meaning. So, art and group ritual become the ways in which we mourn this loss and to create a meaning to enable the survival of our species. So it goes. Let me just fix this a little bit. Yeah. Okay. So we get depressed because we think we're going to die. We know we're going to die, and then we create art. Anyway, it seems like romantic love is a form of displaced religious feeling, and this particular, like, I hate to use the word instantiation, it annoys me, but the instantiation of this loss or this form of consciousness, it begins with, I'm going to take you way back, with the cathars. And then it subsequently clothed itself in romance, and it acquires a concrete form through medieval poetry. So who are the cathars? So Catharism was the biggest threat to the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages before the Reformation. It was first chronicled in 1143. It was declared a heresy by Pope Innocent III. The Catholic Church called it the Great Heresy. Many of us think of the Crusades as an exclusively anti-Muslim enterprise, but what was called the Albigensian Crusade was anti-Cathar. Perhaps 1 million people were exterminated in that crusade, and it wasn't located in the Middle East. It was the south of France, mainly. So there's always been two tendencies within the church. There's the church of power, the institutional church, and the church of faith. Live like Jesus, celebrate the call. The Cathars believed that the Catholic Church was corrupt and had perverted the message of God. So this theme, it's a theme, by the way, that's run throughout Christian history. So the issue of church corruption wasn't only a Cathar preoccupation with church wealth and the loose morals of popes and bishops and so on, and priests and all kind. The differences the Cathars had with Catholicism lay in theology. So the Cathars were dualists. So all religions want the good over the evil. They hate the evil. And the nature of God, good and evil, it's central to the differences the Cathars had with Catholicism. Dualism implies there are two gods, not one. One is good and one is evil. And the dualist structure of reality makes the universe a very different place to inhabit. We don't see the world as the best of all possible worlds and as a marvel of creation. Instead, we see it as split down the middle and we're caught between two rival forces. So this is the dualistic perspective. The good God was the God of the New Testament, who created the heavens, light, souls. The evil God is the God of the Old Testament. So Cathars believed our immortal souls were trapped by the devil in physical bodies. So the purpose of existence was to free yourself from the physical world and return to God. So the world is evil and our true essence is in the beyond. That's the Cathar belief. So this isn't the Hegelian beautiful soul, by the way, but if you've been following along, you can't mistake this dualist consciousness. You can't escape it, right? And it's followed humanity around for as long as we've had organised religion. So dualism is, of course, it's older than Judaism. Zoroastrianism, it's the oldest dualist religion. And it looks at the world as a battle between equally opposed forces of good and evil. So this way of looking at reality and the soul, this resurfaces time and time again, and it did so with Catharism. So let's take, for example, another example of from Greek times, Orphism. So Zoroastrianism regards the body as the material vehicle of the soul, yeah? But Orphism took another twist, and it saw the soul as divine and the body as an evil mortal prison for the soul. And by the way, Orphic mythology is wonderful. So the Titans, their mythology is this, okay? The Titans preceded the Olympian gods. Dionysus was the son of Zeus and Persephone. So the Titans became jealous of baby Dionysus because he was so gorgeous. So they killed him, they chopped him up, and they even ate him. Dionysus is resurrected because Athena saves his heart. But Zeus obviously was, terribly unhappy, and he destroyed the Titans. So we humans are born from the remains of the Titans. That's Orphism. And we bear a kind of original titanic sin. It's not the same as the Christian version, but Orphism held that our body was made of a titanic substance and was therefore evil, while the soul was formed from a divine Dionysian substance. But the followers of Orphism believes that following the directions of their religion, the soul will be saved in the afterlife and released from its earthly bonds. So there's evidence that the Orphists were a type of Pythagoreans. So Pythagoras he's the mathematics guy, mathematical fame. So according to them, mathematics could explain the world we see and hear. The essence of all things are numbers, and the universe was sustained by harmony. And music, is a wonderful example of that. Another interesting iteration of dualism emerges with the Essenes. So they were a heretical Jewish sect based in Qumran in the West Bank, not far from Jerusalem. And they believed in a similar light and darkness divide. And like the Cathars, they had an inner group who held to strict celibacy, vows, and another less committed members who, although they followed the faith, they lived more normal lives. And then shortly afterwards, we've got Gnosticism with a G, Gnosticism. So that means there's a hidden God, a good God, and an evil but lesser God. So the various Gnostic religious tendencies were either radically dualist, two gods, or modified dualist with a more powerful good God. And again, the Gnostics were ascetics. That means that they enjoyed being cold and hungry. Gnosticism may have had an influence on early Islam in that both draw a sharp distinction between this world and the hereafter, with God being beyond any human comprehension. So Islam, though, didn't support the concept of a lesser God. Gnosticism was an active player in Christian theology in one form or another for centuries. So now we introduce St. Paul, who was a game changer. Well, not a game changer, he's opposed to these dualist interpretations. So Paul and Pauline Christianity, which is basically early Roman Catholicism, had to battle it out against other Christian dualist heresies. And when I say heresy, I mean that the winner was Pauline Christianity, and they label everyone as heretics because heretics lose. So if you lose, you become a heretic, and if you win, then you are the true faith, whichever faith that is. Okay, so in the year 325, Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea because there had to be a consensus about the nature of Christ and divinity. Because people want to know, what's the relation of Jesus to God, the Father? Was Jesus a man, a demigod, a god? Was he of the same substance as God, or was he made of a different substance? And the main challenge to the Pauline consensus seems to have come from someone called Arius from Cyrene, who believed that Jesus was not the same as the Father. Arianism, after Arius, would be enormously significant in Western Europe, and it was the religion of the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the successors, the Vandals, the successor states of the Western Roman Empire. And so Arius disputed as rivals were Alexander and Athanasius of Alexandria, and they held that Jesus, the Father, and the Holy Spirit were the one person. Or maybe, if not the one person, they were the one substance. There were three people in one. Okay, the Emperor Constantine tried to reconcile the church about the status of Christ. And out of the Council of Nicaea emerged what we now call the Nicene Creed. So there were several creeds in existence in the early church, but the Nicene Creed became the official statement of belief. The original Nicene Creed, it's pretty much the same as the one that you've heard Catholics saying today in church. So it's, you know, the one, we believe in one God. This is the original one. The Father Almighty, maker of all things visible and invisible, and in one God, and in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, begotten from the Father, only begotten, that is, from the substance of the Father, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten not made, of one substance with the Father. It's with the farmer, with the Father. So it goes on like that. Okay, so Gnosticism emerged really early in early Christianity, and it held this dualist interpretation. It might have been the first century even that it emerged. So many Gnostics believed that the world had been created by a malevolent force or God, and that the true God was hidden. The Gnostics therefore held that material existence was defective and evil. They believed that the road to salvation was through special knowledge of this hidden divine God. And Gnosticism seems to have been more mystical than other Christian belief systems, and that was the way to get access to God, through mysticism, through visions. So the material world was believed to be imperfect, evil and filthy, and our essence is the spirit and not the flesh. So some Greek groups believe that Satan or some other demiurge had actually created the world. And in my view, this religious perspective had to fail because the followers of St. Paul were realists. Look, it exists. We've got to deal with it. But they didn't want to deal with it. So that's why I think they probably lost out. Anyway, Marcion was one of the most important Gnostic interpretations of Christianity, Marcion. He believed in the existence of two gods, a true God and a false God. The false God created the material world. He's the God of the Old Testament. He's a bad God, right? So, Marcionites rejected the material world and were rigorous religious purists. The competing Roman church, you know, the Pauline church, denounced Marcion as a heretic. And the Marcionite idea that we discover in Catharism, that was that Christ was a spirit apparition, not of the flesh. So this idea became known as Docetism, and it was pronounced heretical, of course. So Catharism believed that the road to salvation was through the guidance of the perfect. So the perfect being the equivalent of the Catholic priesthood, only nicer. So this differed from Gnostic schools, which thought it stressed the way to salvation. They stressed that the Cathars, okay, they stressed that the way to salvation was through the ministrations of the perfect, rather than by direct gnosis or knowledge on the part of the believer. So it wasn't the believer having a vision and working out what the world was. It was through the perfect telling you what the world was. Anyway, so in doing so, ironically, Catharism mirrored Catholicism, because Catholicism, it claimed that the only way to salvation was through the intervention of priests. So it's got a church structure in it already. So belief that Christ was a different entity to God, the Father, and somehow subordinate, was something that the Catholic Church would have to contend with for centuries. Manichaeism was founded by the Persian prophet Mani, who was originally a member of Elkasite, a Jewish Christian religious grouping. So Mani proselytized the religion of light. So Mani took ideas from Zoroastrianism, Christianity and Buddhism. And Manichaeism is again a dualist view and maintains that evil and good are equally balanced. And Manichaeism lost out to mainstream Catholicism by the 6th century AD. But it lives on now with the word maniac. And that was a derogatory term for this alternative belief system. But it didn't go away because the Bulgarian Empire, I mean, you'd think the Bulgarians would be so cool or so far out there, but they were. The Bulgarian Empire, that was recognized as a state by the Byzantines in 681, the Common Era. And it seems that the religion of the Bulgarians, which was called Bogomilism, was a mixture of Christian heresies. So Manichaeism was definitely present in Bulgaria. And the Bogomil Church spread to Serbia and Bosnia even. In the 13th century, a crusade was pronounced to destroy this heresy. So we could see that, you know, these churches it was not like some kind of like odd dispute between philosophers. This was like people getting killed in the thousands. So anyway, there was Bogomilism survived, and there was a crusade against it, like Catharism, and so we seem to have a time overlap with Bogomilism from Bulgaria, which spread westward, I should say, and Catharism. So the Bogomil Church had a hierarchy of the perfect, yeah, the higher believers, the higher group, and the believers, similar to the Manichaeans had the same thing, the elect and the listeners. The Bogomils had another level, the believers, below the believers, sorry. So you've got a higher level, the believers, and a lower level with the Bogomils, yeah. So the Bogomils thought of themselves as being truly Christian. So they didn't think of themselves as being heretic. They read the New Testament. So the Bogomil church leaders had 12 disciples, and they lived lives of simplicity and poverty in reaction to what they saw as the corrupt Catholic Church. Many heresies flourished precisely because of the corruption of the church, or the power of the church. Because the Church of Paul was realist, and its weak point was that it had to compromise and it had to struggle with the real world, corruption and human fallibility. It's got to struggle with these things. But because it's created a real world church, in the real world, power and wealth are corrupting forces. You can't get away from it. And every institution is going to be corrupted in that sense. So Pope Leo, as an example, he was 1049 to 54. He was a reformer, because some of the Catholics thought, you know, yeah, it's terrible, these people doing this awful stuff. The Catholic Church was not full of people who were cruel and mean, but there were lots of people who are cruel and mean who were members of the Catholic Church. So Pope Leo comes along, lots of reformer popes came along. He tried to root out the corruption, and others did. So criticism of the wayward lifestyles of the clergy, it was a common theme at this time for church reformers. It's an enduring feature of Christianity, I've got to say. So in the 12th century, there were itinerant holy men who were critical of the clergy, and they were a common sight. And also they were a rallying point for anti-clerical protests before the Reformation. So the odd guy would come up and people would say, yeah, he's got a point, but he didn't have a church behind him. The Cathars were first recorded, as I said, in 1143. And when the Cathars were brought before a church court for the first time by the Bishop of Cologne, they discovered that they were an organized grouping. They were organized into three groups. You had the elect, the believers, and the listeners. So they baptized with the laying on of hands and not water. They also seem to have condemned marriage. The Cathars were different to these itinerant traveling preachers. They were railing against the clergy because, you know, and so on. But the Cathars had a significant and powerful organizational structure. They offered a real organizational challenge to the Catholic Church itself. And so they were tackled head on as heretics. And eventually this resulted in the crusade to destroy them completely. So Catharism also meant an aversion to the flesh. So like the Bogomils, they held to a dualist cosmogony. That meant they believed that the material world was evil and was the creation of the devil. Okay, so God existed in a world of eternal light beyond the dark abyss of human existence. That's their punchline. So both the Cathars and the Bogomils, they rejected the church sacraments completely. They believed that the Church of Rome was in fact the Church of Satan. They did use the Our Father, but they rejected the use of church buildings, and they met instead in homes, outdoors, barns, and so on. And like the Bogomils, they also rejected the Old Testament. So this three-class system of the Cathars is similar to the Bogomils. The listeners, they were the least committed. The believers formed the majority. So they led ordinary lives, and they didn't have to avoid meat, sex, or wine. and they followed the Gospels, and they were taught to love one another. So all that they've got in common with Catholicism. But the inner sanctum of the Cathars was the group called the Perfect, and this is where this dualist doctrine was purest. So they were its priesthood, and they were revered almost as living saints. So in the south of France in 1167, the largest gathering of Cathars took place from as far away as Eastern Europe. So the leading figure was a guy called Papa Nicetas from Italy. So the Cathar priesthood contrasted enormously with the Catholic priesthood, because the Cathars seem to have been generally good and decent, no corruption. And although the Cathars were suppressed, they also declined because there was a rise in holy orders such as the dynamic Franciscans and their devout poverty, but they remain within the Catholic Church. So Denis de Rougemont, in his book Love in the Western World, which is brilliant, it may not all be right, but it is brilliant, he closely associates the Cathars with the rise of the troubadours. Okay, so the troubadours were travelling composers and performers of the lyric Occitan dialect or language. So they would, a troubadour, so we know he's on his horse, he gets off his horse, he goes to a court, he pulls out his lyre and he strums his poetry, and it's all about romantic love. So the troubadour's main themes actually were chivalry and courtly love. I should say courtly love, not romantic love. I meant, so courtly love. So we'll describe that in a minute. So courtly love means the virtues of a particular lady were extolled by the poet. So sometimes these were literal love songs, and they were often addressed to a woman who was unattainable, while other troubadour poems and songs were in fact allegories of spiritual development. So next week or next time we're going to do more about the Cathars and more about the troubadours as well. And this is going to be the last one in The Beautiful Soul. So see you next time. Bye.